Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by people who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountain. Come with me, and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains, and we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Now, as we said before, we watch all of these movies where somebody walks up behind somebody else and slaps a rag over their nose and mouth, causing said person to fade into unconsciousness. Now, we've all seen enough to know that they must be using chloroform to disable the person for whatever purpose they intend to do. And you've heard me say that I'm always thinking that something along the lines, anyway, of I wonder if there's a deviant out there watching and thinking, man, I need to get my hands on some of that stuff. It'd sure make my job of raining terror on folks a whole lot easier. Now, that just so happens that not to be that only folks that want to get their hands on it, but there are folks out there who might find their hindquarters in a bind and decide to use chloroform to cover their ass. That would be why I'm here today. Yeah, we're back in Charlottesville, Virginia, which seems to be the chloroform capital of our show so far. So call your mom and them, sit on down there and make yourself to home, and let me tell you about what happened a few years back. On December 12th, 2012 in Charlottesville, Virginia, 20-year-old Chelsea Steiniger was hanging with her boyfriend Michael Mills at his place over on Grady Avenue. Michael lived in the housing project there for folks who needed help with mental health or substance abuse or just plain homelessness. Maybe a failure to launch or two might be stirred in there too, because that's considered a disability then. So you might say that he was down on his luck or something along those lines, or he wouldn't be living there. But despite everything that he was going through, he sure cared a whole lot about Chelsea. Now, she wasn't exactly well off herself. She worked as a waitress at a local Red Robin there. Now, she didn't have a place to call home and did a good bit of couch hopping, which included her mother's house. Most of the time, she didn't stay long at her mother's house because she and her mother argued a right smart. So, Mom's couch was probably the last refuge when it came to where she was going to lay her head that night or any night. Now, Chelsea might have been in bad shape, partly because her husband was locked up in the Stony Lonesome. Yeah, that does beg the question, don't it? Why was she having a boyfriend then if she's married? But I reckon times are tough sometimes, and I couldn't find anything on how much time he might have had or if they were on the outs when all that was going on. That doesn't tie into our story anyway. But getting back to December 12th, it was getting pretty late that night, and Chelsea asked Michael if she could just go ahead and spend the night. Michael pretty much said something along the lines of that if it was up to him, she could, but the rules of the housing authority said that she couldn't, and if they caught him, he'd be thrown out with nowhere to go himself. So she couldn't stay. Heck, she'd already been there past the time that she was supposed to be allowed to visit anyway, and he wasn't sure that he wasn't going to get in trouble as it was for that. Chelsea practically begged him to stay, but Michael told her that, you're going to have to go. I can't risk it. So now, being about half pissed off, around 11:30, she trundled out and started walking toward her mother's house in the cold, where she felt like it, whether she felt like it, liked it, or whatever, but she was always had a place to stay there, and I guess that's where she was heading to. But Grady Avenue, where Michael lived, was known as not exactly being the best neighborhood as far as crime was concerned, but it was set, where pretty much anywhere you wanted to go in Charlottesville, it was central to it, and nothing was far off from it. But Chelsea's mother lived in a place they called Pantops. Yeah, it was around 2.5 miles away from Michael's place along the outskirts of town, so she had quite a nice little walk ahead of her. A lot of folks who ain't been to Charlottesville don't know that as far as square miles, it's really not a big square mileage of property or place there. It's pretty small for the amount of people that live there. Pantops was an area that was once owned by President Thomas Jefferson and his family. Now, Chelsea was still pretty hot under the collar while she walked along in the blue-ass cold mountain air with the wind whipping down the neck of her shirt, like Charlie Pride said. But she and Michael texted back and forth as she walked along her way, heading over to her mom's house. At one point, Chelsea asked if she could come back to the place if her and her mother got into it. So I guess she was anticipating around 15 or whatever. But at around 11:50, Michael texted back saying that he couldn't do that and he was very sorry for it. He told her that she really needed to try to find her own apartment, and over none of this stuff would be going on. Chelsea didn't like it, but she kept stepping off mileage. That's about the time she noticed a white van that passed her at least a couple of times. Now, of course, it was a white van in the cold, lonely night, and I'd bet most of you probably listening right now already knew that, didn't you? She got to the parking lot of the Lucky 7 convenience store and along Market Street there in downtown. That's pretty much kind of like a 7-Eleven. That's when the van whipped up. The door swung open and a man inside said, "It's cold outside." I probably followed that up by lifting one eyebrow like you know what I mean. Then he asked, "Do you need a ride?" Chelsea at that point was fixing to freeze her tips off, and the man seemed like he was a nice guy, and there was a police station pretty much right across the road. She figured that surely a maniac would have better sense than to try to do something right across the road from a police station, so Chelsea hopped on in. Being that she was already texting with Michael, she thumbed out one more to Michael. He was saying, "Can't type, too cold. Some dude is giving me a ride." The text was time stamped at 12:10 in the morning. Now, clearly she could text if she sent that, I imagine, and that was pretty long-winded for somebody with frozen thumbs, wasn't it? But as they headed toward her mother's pan-top condo, Chelsea said that the driver started asking her weird questions that made her feel pretty uncomfortable. She said that he slipped his hand over her thigh, but she pulled away in her seat. Chelsea texted Michael 8 minutes later, that after her last text saying that he tried to get in my pants. Chelsea said that she started feeling relieved as they drove up her mom's street, but that relief, I guess, was pretty much short-lived, because at 12:21 she texted Michael again, "Just pulled up and they won't let me out of the car." Chelsea said, I don't know what was preventing her from opening the door or getting out, but anyway, Chelsea said that she was filled with fear as the van pulled away from Mom's condo with her still in it. 1 minute later, she texts Michael again saying, "In the car just past Pantops. I don't know where we're going, baby." I, I don't know. Was abbreviated, old-fashioned way like we all do, IDK. But Chelsea said that she was screaming at the driver, "Where are you taking me? And what are you doing?" Back on Grady Avenue, all them texts to Michael was starting to making him a little bit worked up. But at 12:23, he got another text from Chelsea's number saying that she doesn't have her phone. And over the next 10 minutes, he went from concerned to flat out scared. At 12:27, he got another text saying she's so sexy when she's passed out. Then at 12:28 came, she was a fighter, I'll give her that much. And then 12:36, I'll let her wake up before I let her talk to you. Michael texts back at 12:37 saying, "What did you do?" And then a minute later, he followed that up with another and saying, "Where are you taking her?" A minute later, he got his reply saying, "She's in my house." Michael texts back that he was fixing to call the police. That's when he realized that he didn't know who Chelsea was with, what kind of car she might be in, or where she might even be. And the police wouldn't be able to do a whole lot of anything about it. So all he could do was sit there and wait. While Michael was waiting by his phone, tore up from the floor up, Chelsea said that she woke up on the floor of what looked to be an empty house feeling groggy and confused. That's when she said that she remembered the driver taking a wet bandana and forcing it over her face. It had a chemical scent to it as she started fighting for her life, but in a few seconds she felt herself just fading to black. Now, Chelsea said that she realized that she must have passed out. She came to that conclusion, she said, because she came to her senses on a cold, hard floor of what sounds to me a whole lot like she was describing a crack house. Then she said that she heard the clicking sound that she thought sounded a whole lot like her cell phone packing out text messages. Then, according to poor old Chelsea, through the one eye that she could just about halfway get open, she could see the sick, twisted little piece of dog squeeze that chloroformed her, had her phone, and was texting on it. She figured that, well, that's when he was texting Michael just to be an asshole in general. So she says that she just laid there and pretended to be unconscious while she tried to come up with a way out of that mess. That's about the time that the criminal master chloroform expert put down the phone, and she heard him leave the room, walk downstairs, and go out to his van, because we all know that that's what these hardcore criminals do. They leave you alone so you can escape. According to Chelsea, that's when she made her move. She up, grabbed her phone, and tried to snap out of her coma, all while she was texting Michael at 12:49. She said only one word: baby. Well, whatever that was supposed to mean. Then she said that she tiptoed around the place and managed to find a second-story balcony, and she leaped off it, I assume, because she couldn't fly off of it, hit the ground like a sack of potatoes, and batted hell-bent for leather for the woods. That's when at 12:51, she said that Michael was trying to call. So she texted that she couldn't answer because the big bad chloroform man will find her. So I reckon she let it keep ringing as not to draw attention to herself. Then about a minute later, she took a chance and called Michael. She whispered to him that she was hiding in the woods and needed to be very careful. Michael told her to hang up and call the dadgum police. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, Michael had a gut full of it, so he called the police. Chelsea never did. She said that she was too concerned with staying hid out. And besides, she said that she and her husband had had bad experiences with police and figured they wouldn't believe a word rolled off her tongue anyway. That's when she said that she heard the van door closing and Mr. Chloroform go back to the house. And she knew that he was fixing to find out that she was gone. She stayed all crouched down in the woods there like you do when you're hiding. Then she saw him walk on the second-story balcony and was looking around like a red-tailed hawk looking for a field mouse. Chelsea said that it seemed like hours that he was up there gaping around trying to see where she went. It was actually probably more like 15 minutes, because she heard the engine start up and then she saw the van drive off. At that point, Chelsea picked up the phone to call Michael, but wouldn't you know it, the battery was dead now. That's when Chelsea said that she panicked and tried to figure out where in the world she was. She eased out back toward the house, for she saw the address, and then walked out toward a bigger road and realized where she was. That bigger road was hard to miss because it was US 250 bypass. But about 2 miles from her mother's house actually is where she was, so she took off walking toward her mom's house in the cold again. Meanwhile, the Charlottesville police were trying to call her over and over again. All they could do was leave a voicemail. All of that while police roll up on Michael's house to wait and see if Chelsea called. Chelsea said that after another long, cold walk, she stepped up on her mother's condo there in Pantops, half froze, plumb wore out, and dazed from being chloroformed. Once she got there, she plugged her phone in to charge. After warming up a few minutes, she called Michael from the house phone. Michael answered and was pretty blame happy to hear that she was safe. Then he handed the phone to the police, who wanted to know whereabouts Chelsea was, and told her that the police were on the way over to get the details of her abduction. You know, since that's illegal and they can't have a madman running around Charlottesville chloroforming and dragging people off. When detectives rolled up, Chelsea told them what I told you so far, because that's where I got it all from. That left police pretty much worked up to try to track down Mr. Chloroform and drag him in. They didn't have a whole lot to go on. Chelsea had described him as a white man, large in height and bulk. Without much of a lead, police started a search at the crack house where Chelsea told them she was escaped from. That turned out to be a dud because they couldn't find squat where anybody had even been there. Since Chelsea's whole story started at the Lucky 7 convenience store, that's where they went and where they caught a break. They talked to 2 employees. Didn't neither one of them remember seeing a young lady get in a van anywhere along the line, but of course the detectives kept talking because that's how you learn stuff. They described the van for the employees and told them that they were looking for a big overgrown white guy who drove it. That's when the light went off in the employees' minds. They remembered a regular customer who fit that description, and he just happened to drive a white van. They told police that he didn't seem like he'd be the chloroform nutball they were looking for, but they gave police his name, which was Mark Weiner. Detectives tracked him down without much trouble and asked him some tough questions because once they laid eyes on him, they saw that he could very well pass as a professional wrestler. He was so big. He was well over 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 300 pounds. Police learned from Mr. Weiner that he'd been living near Charlottesville for quite some time, and he was the manager of the Food Line grocery store there in town. Mr. Weiner outright admitted that he picked up Chelsea that night, but he drove her over to her mother's house in Pantops. Mark was 52 years old, married with a 9-year-old son, and just like the Lucky 7 employees said, he didn't seem to be a perpetrator at all. But that didn't stop police because just about every perp they ever arrested told them they didn't do nothing. But by then they were pretty convinced that they had Mr. Chloroform sitting right there in front of them, act like he didn't know his ass from his elbow about chloroform or anything else about Chelsea. So, without further ado, police reached across the table, arrested, dragged him to jail, and charged him with abduction with intent to defile, and then probably went to the bathroom and washed their hands because no telling what else the scumbag had been into that they sure as heck didn't want none of it on them. Then they whisked Chelsea downtown, where she promptly identified him as the one and only chloroform whack job, what dragged her off and done God knows what to her while she was in a coma. Of course, Mr. Weiner was held without bond while he sat there wondering who hit John. Meanwhile, Chelsea was recounting her tale of woe for the news media, who regaled her as a hero, saying that she was just glad he's off the streets. A trial was scheduled for May 21st, 2013, and the prosecutor would be Denise Lunsford. Mr. Weiner was represented by Ford Childress, a lawyer with over 30 years' experience and was a former prosecutor himself. As the trial date drew closer, Prosecutor Lunsford reached out to Mr. Childress to discuss what she called resolving the matter. She must have felt like she was doing him a favor, I reckon. But she told Mr. Weiner's attorney that the Commonwealth was prepared to amend the charge to just plain old-fashioned abduction, for which the guidelines sentencing was up to 6 months in the pokey. Of course, being that he would be convicted of that, the first thing they'd do was drag him off the back porch of his food line and fire him, if they hadn't already. But worse yet, everybody would blackball him from ever getting another job anywhere for as long as he lived. His only advantage to that was that he was 52 years old, not 25, so at least he wouldn't have as far to go in life with that cloud hanging over him all the time. So, that being the case, he turned down the plea bargain because he pretty much said that he wasn't admitting to something he ain't done. On Tuesday, May 21st, 2013, the trial kicked off and was scheduled for 1 day, but ended up being drug out for 4. A lot of the time spent with Chelsea on the witness stand, crying and pointing her finger in Mr. Weiner's face. Of course, they found Mr. Weiner to be a big, hairy, overgrown, knuckle-dragging piece of guilty dog squeeze and intended to put him away for it. So that was done. On to the next case, I reckon. No, not by a long shot. Now this whole mess really gets good. During her testimony, as well as her statement to law enforcement, Chelsea said that she went unconscious a few seconds just after the rag was slapped over her face. Somebody somewhere along the line realized that, well, that made absolutely no sense because chloroform just don't work that way. You don't just take a sniff and feel something cold on your shoulder and look up to find out it's the floor. It takes 5 or 10 minutes for the thing to take effect. That's why Mark's attorney filed a motion to continue the sentencing to a later date, and the judge set a date for in the summertime sometime. Now, as it happened, the defense was able to get even further continuance, and no sentencing took place in 2013 at all. That while Mr. Weiner stayed right there in jail staring at the wall. While all of that was going on, it just so happened that a whole new set of attorneys were reviewing the case to determine whether they could get the verdict overturned based on some of the concerns regarding the truthfulness of Chelsea herself. By January, Mr. Weiner had been sitting in jail for over a year when his new attorneys formally took over the case, and they notified the prosecutor on January 16th. Then came April 14th, 2014, when Mr. Benjamin, the new attorney, filed a motion to set aside the guilty verdict that had been rendered against his client Mark Weiner, pretty much because Mr. Weiner was convicted of a crime that never occurred. He said that Chelsea, who was the Commonwealth's only witness to and that so-called crime, fabricated an abduction to manipulate and provoke her boyfriend Michael Mills when he wouldn't let her stay at his apartment overnight. Chelsea then walked from the boyfriend's apartment to the Lucky 7 convenience store, where she received a ride from the kind-hearted Mr. Weiner, whose only mistake was not wanting to see the poor woman freeze to death in the cold Appalachian weather. Now, when they arrived at her mother's apartment, she gave him her phone number, probably with a raised eyebrow, and, got out. Chelsea then started texting a made-up story to her boyfriend, pretending that she had been abducted. Mr. Weiner's attorney found it odd that after listening to a message on her phone from the police asking her to call call them so they could locate her, she up and deleted the phone's call record and stopped using her phone. Judge Cheryl Higgins held a hearing on the motion on June 13th, 2014. Despite the amount of evidence of fraud in the court and ineffective assistance of counsel, Judge Higgins denied the motion because she claimed that she didn't have legal authority to do anything else. Then, why would she have a hearing in the first place? But the judge then set sentencing for late July, but it would end up being continued, again at the request of Mr. Weiner's counsel. By then, local folks were starting to get pissed because they thought that a maniac was about to be turned loose on them. Of course, not that many people cared, but Mr. Weiner's family was devastated. After the hearing, his brother said that they were just outraged at the outcome of this. On December 8th, about 2 years since Mark Weiner had been thrown in jail, Prosecutor Lunsford got an email from Mr. Weiner's attorney saying attached is a new motion to set aside the verdict along with new exhibits. Now, being that the justice crawls at a creep when it comes to this type of thing, I don't have any problem putting you in there, but getting out's a different story. They set a new hearing, and it wouldn't take place until May of 2015. It really didn't matter, though, because the same judge threw it all out of court again for the same reason. Then came July 8th of 2015, when out of the wild blue yonder, Mr. Weiner's attorney received an email from Prosecutor Lunsford. It said, "Steve, I need to talk to you immediately. Please call my cell." Of course, he didn't waste no time and couldn't believe what he heard when he did. Prosecutor Lunsford had just learned that Chelsea had been caught selling cocaine to 2 undercover police officers. She said that she hadn't known of it, but it was her responsibility to have disclosed that evidence favorable to the defense ahead of the May 6, 2015 hearing they had already had. She still believed Chelsea's story, but thought that the drug dealing allegations disturbed the appearance of fairness in the case. She was prepared to work with Steve in asking the judge to vacate the verdict. After some back and forth over how they'd going to say it in court, Steve drafted another motion, which by then could probably do it in his sleep, and calling for Mr. Wiener's conviction to be vacated. This time, Prosecutor Lunsford joined in the motion. The same judge that threw it out twice set a hearing for July 14th. Now, I guess everybody thought, well, I guess so she could throw it out again. Mark Wiener was dragged back into the courtroom all over again, this time wearing prison stripes and handcuffs. At the end of the short hearing, the judge, who didn't have the legal authority to undo a conviction, exercised her authority to do just that very thing, and with that, Mark Wiener was free as a bird. His family celebrated with him as he left the courtroom. His wife, Flo, never stopped insisting on her husband's innocence, and with that, he went home pretty well ruined, and nobody who put him in that position to start with answering for anything. I guess not until this day, even. Chelsea Steiniger went on like nothing ever happened and ended up having 2 children with her boyfriend, Michael Mills. Their relationship turned out to be a regular fully engulfed dumpster fire, with numerous complaints of violence filed with the police by one against the other and the other against the other against them. So, in a 2008 case, Chelsea accused Michael of hauling off and punching her, and despite evidence that Chelsea admitted filing false police reports in the past, the judge found him guilty of assault and battery anyway. So for her, dance it just continues, because she has now gained the notoriety of being the most arrested human being in Central Virginia, with up to, last I counted was 63 arrests. Folks, I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian murder, mystery, or legend, and I will see you then.